무엇이 우리의 연봉을 결정할까요? 학력일까요? 아님 직종? 노동 경제 분야의 세계적인 석학 엔리코 모레티는 뜻밖의 답을 내놨습니다. 바로 어디에 사느냐입니다. 그는 25년간 주요 도시의 일자리와 소득 추이를 분석해 일자리의 새로운 지형을 밝혀냈습니다. 세계화 시대에 물리적 위치는 중요하지 않다는 오랜 가설을 뒤집으며 세계의 찬사를 받았죠. 우리는 어디에 살고 어디에서 일해야 할까요? 혁신 기업을 끌어당기는 매력적인 도시들의 성공 비법은 뭘까요? 엔리코 모레티가 급변하는 세계의 경제 지도 속 여러분의 길라잡이가 돼줄 겁니다.
Hello EBS viewers, welcome to With and Swap, Great Minds. I'm Enrico Moretti, Professor of Economics at the University of California at Berkeley. In this graph you can see the share of employment in manufacturing in Korea starting in the late 80s, in 1989. At the beginning of the period, almost 1 in 3 Korean workers were working in a factory. Today, that share is less than half. So in this short period, we have lost half of the manufacturing jobs that existed in Korea relative to the Korean population. This is not just a Korean phenomenon. This is very common across all industrialized countries. This decline, I think, is one of the most consequential trends in the labor markets of industrialized countries over the past 50 years. It had profound effects on the communities that were involved. It generated both economic impact, but also cultural impact. Essentially, a way of life went away with the decline in manufacturing employment. There's one important exception. There's one group of workers whose job have actually increased in this period. And this is highly educated workers who work in the manufacturing sector. Starting in the 70s, the US has lost 380,000 blue-collar workers every year, both in good years and in bad years. But the number of engineers working in the US manufacturing sector is actually double in the same period. So US factories were shedding blue-collar workers, but at the same time they were employing more and more workers with college degrees and master degrees, especially in engineering. These trends had profound effect at the local level, in the communities that were directly affected by the plant closures and the communities surrounding those cities. Manufacturing employment was heavily concentrated before the decline, and therefore its decline had particularly negative effects on some cities and some regions. In the US, the most clear example is Detroit. Detroit used to be one of the most prosperous cities in the US in the 1950s. And now its name has become synonymous with urban decay and urban blight because of the decline in manufacturing employment. In the UK, Liverpool used to be one of the most dynamic local economies of the country in the 60s. Its factories were producing goods that were sold all over the world. In fact, that's where the Industrial Revolution got started. But since then, the manufacturing jobs have evaporated, and the share of employment in manufacturing has declined significantly. In recent research that I've done with two co-authors, Gagliardi and Serafinelli, we studied the experience of almost 2,000 cities in these 6 countries. And we focus on former manufacturing hubs, which are cities where the share of manufacturing employment was particularly high at the peak of their country manufacturing. And we find that there are large differences in employment consequences of manufacturing decline across cities within each country. In a significant large number of cities, total employment in former manufacturing hubs actually grew relative to their country mean in the years after the manufacturing peak. In particular, 35% of manufacturing hubs have now a level of employment that is equal or above the one that they had in the year of the manufacturing peak. In other words, for each Detroit and each Liverpool, we find that there is at least one manufacturing hub that has a successful recovery experience. Now, the key question is, what characteristics of a city make it more likely that the city will recover from the decline in manufacturing employment? What we find in our work is that the former manufacturing hubs that fully recover are cities where the loss of manufacturing jobs was offset by gains in the service sector. And in particular, they were offset by gains in the human capital and knowledge-intensive industries. This is a diverse group of industries that include research and development, life science research, high-tech, but also finance, marketing. What they have in common is that they make intensive use of highly educated workers. You can see it here in a graph that is taken from the same research, where we plot the share of workers with a college degree in the city at the peak, in the year of the peak of manufacturing in that city, on the horizontal axis, against the mean growth in employment in the years after the decline of manufacturing started. And what you see is that it's a positive relationship, suggesting that in cities with a lot of college graduates, you saw faster employment growth in the years after the decline in manufacturing. In this lecture, we have learned some important facts about the long-term effect of the decline in manufacturing employment. The decline of manufacturing employment had profound effects on the cities that lost manufacturing jobs, especially in former manufacturing hubs that started off with a high share of manufacturing employment. But there are also some examples of recovery and resilience. These are cities that were able to offset the loss of manufacturing jobs with the creation of new jobs in the service sector.